answered one of his questions accurately, he would beam and say, "Hats off!" After dinner, I was examining a porcelain figurine of Cavour when a trim, elderly, silver-haired gentleman approached and introduced himself. He was Paolo Rossi, not the football player or the actor-musician, but a distinguished politician and judge, a social democrat who, in his youth, had been an opponent of Mussolini. "So," he said, after seeing what I was looking at, "you are interested in the unification, in the Unità d'Italia." At the time, I was a young journalist writing about Lebanon in the early years of its civil war, but I remembered enough from my school days to know what he was talking about. My history teacher in the 1960s had been an old-fashioned liberal who, unfamiliar with the revisionist work of the great historian Denis Mack Smith, believed that Italy's Risorgimento had been an exemplary case of liberty triumphing over repression. In consequence, I was astounded by the next words of Signor Rossi, who 20 years earlier had been Minister of Education. "You know, Davide," he said in a low conspiratorial voice, as if nervously uttering a heresy, "Garibaldi did Italy a great disservice. If he had not invaded Sicily and Naples, we in the north would have the richest and most civilized state in Europe." After looking round the room at the other guests, he added in an even lower voice, "Of course, to the south we would have a neighbor like Egypt." My work soon took me to Palestine, then back to Lebanon, and next to post-Franco Spain, so it was several years before I could return to Italy and go to Palermo to write a biography of Giuseppe Tomasi de Lampedusa, the author of The Leopard. Yet the judge's words stayed in my mind, and I started to question whether the unification of Italy had been either a necessary or a successful enterprise. I never accepted his view that the Bourbon Kingdom of Naples would have been like Egypt, but I sometimes wondered whether Italians might have been better off divided into 3, 4, or even more states. Italians seemed to me to be internationalist and, in a good sense, provincial, but not nationalist, except when their leaders forced or cajoled them into being so. In any case, nations are not inevitable, as the people of Kurdistan well know, and sometimes their creation is so artificial that, as with Yugoslavia, they simply fall apart. In today's Europe, which contains so many successful small nations, there surely would have been room for a flourishing Tuscany, perhaps the most civilized state of the 18th century, and a prosperous Venice, a once great republic with 1,000 years of independent history. Several years ago, I decided to stay in each of Italy's 20 regions, and thus acquire some knowledge of them and their numerous diversities. Traditional histories of Italy had been written from a centripetal view, as if Italian unity had been preordained. I wanted to look at the peninsula's centrifugal tendencies and inquire whether the lateness of unification and the troubles of the nation-state had been not accidents of history, but consequences of the peninsula's past and its geography, which may have made it unsuitable territory for nationalism. Were there not just too many Italys for a successful unity? I thought at first of writing about the 19th and 20th centuries, the periods of Lampedusa's novel and of his life, but I found myself always wanting to go further back, and then further still, to find what, if anything, earlier generations had felt about the concept of Italy, what the Enlightenment had thought, what Dante had believed, what Machiavelli had wanted, what the Emperors Augustus, Charlemagne, Frederick Stupor Mundi, and Napoleon had all made of it. When I told my editor, Stuart Prophet, that Cicero had possessed an idea of Italy, he said, "David, go back to Cicero." I have gone back to Cicero, and to Virgil, and to subsequent eras too, all of which thought of Italy in their own often different fashion.